Salam and peace. This is Imam Malik Mujahid. And thank you so much for those of you who are gathering early in the morning or late in the evening somewhere in the world. We're coming to you not only through Zoom, but also Galaxy 19 satellite for Muslim Network TV, Amazon Fire TV, Roku, and about 15 or so different social media. So thank you so much for joining. It is about 3 years this August when Burmese started the final solution, quote for quote unquote, Rohingya problems. But we continue to remember and continue to work on it. I remember personally, within a few weeks, as people were coming in, walking on these streets, hardly any streets, up and down the hill on the slippery slopes because it was sort of end of monsoon season, learning how to walk. When Rohingyas were literally coming in, there's only one road goes through through the world's largest refugee camp. And sometimes people were standing just on the both sides. And Bangladeshis, full with love, and whatever transportation they have loaded with clothes and supplies and food items were coming in and without stopping, giving it to slow speed on both sides. It was a chaotic scene in terms of logistics. But what I noticed among Rohingya people were, they were calm. I did not hear somebody shouting, calm, collected, moving their ways, or just waiting. I kept going back and back, and I continuously see them in the same way, with patience, sabr, endurance. And when you start talking with them, one thing which is very common, what they will say, they want to go back home. Not only they dress like Burmese, but they think like Burmese. You enter little hut schools, they will greet you in the Burmese language, and they tell you they want to go back. So there is a consensus. They want to go back home. Bangladeshis want them to go back home. And Burmese government actually in words has said they want them back. I know it will not be easy, but there is a consensus about it. Rohingya people with their calm patience, with sabr and endurance are waiting. And Burmese government continues to conspire. I was at ICJ when their leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, completely denied that there is a genocide going on. I had a neighbor who for years, at least for 15 years, had been telling me the state of operation in Burma. And when in 2012, Burmese military burned down the Muslim neighborhood in the capital city of Sittwe and literally marched them to the camps, which New York Times called the concentration camps of the 21st century. Those camps are still there, except the rest of the people have ran away. 3 million people, there are 500,000 left in Burma in terrible situation. The rest of them are in different countries, number one in Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, and some other countries. But one thing which is going in favor of Rohingya people is that their calm, full hopeness is attracting world's eyes and ears. When first time I start using the word genocide, what they were facing, human rights organizations told me, Malik, leave this word alone. It is not going to be helpful. One major human rights organization, actually, after they heard that I used the term genocide, they rescinded invitation for me to speak there. But in December 2018, US House of Representatives, in a bipartisan move led by Republicans, passed resolution, it is genocide. Then US State Department came up with the best possible report based on public opinion research survey of Rohingyas, the crimes they have gone through. And it continued to move forward to International Court of International Criminal Court, and then to International Court of Justice. Rohingyas are moving forward. In 2012, we chose to start the name Burmese Muslims. Although we knew Rohingyas are not Burmese Muslim, but they are independent ethnic group because nobody knew the word Rohingya. Today, that's not the problem. So in the midst of all the difficulties, I wanted to leave that note of hopefulness that Rohingyas are moving forward and no one but they have the credit to do so. And today in this program, we have an extraordinary group of people who have been supporters and leaders. Of course, the foremost among them is Tun Khin, who is, I would say, the most active and most organized and available to anyone and all continent leader of the Rohingya Muslim community. We have Commissioner Nadine Maenza, and Nadine Maenza has been not only a commissioner at the US Commission for International Religious Freedom, but a strong advocate for the rights of Rohingya people and Kachin people. We also have Daniel Solomon, who is with Refugee International. So first of all, I would like Commissioner Nadine Maenza to share her thoughts. She's a commissioner of USERV, the founding executive director of Patriot Voices, where she has provided her expertise to shape the organization's special emphasis on public policy that help working people. Commissioner Maenza.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Imam Malik, for that beautiful presentation to really set the tone for today. And thank you also for including me in this event. Thank you to Justice for All and Burma Task Force, and Imam Malik, especially for encouraging me to visit Bangladesh in Cox's Bazar and help me to arrange for me to meet some people so I could better advocate for them there. So thanks to all of you. As he mentioned, I'm a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or we call ourselves USERF. We are a bipartisan independent government agency with a congressional mandate to assess religious freedom conditions abroad using an international standard and then make recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and to Congress. And there are 9 of us commissioners, and we're bipartisan. I was appointed by the President, but others have been appointed by either Republican or Democratic leaders in the House and Senate. And we also have a professional staff based in Washington, D.C. I was able to join an official USERF delegation trip to Burma with my colleague Anarima Bargova last May, and she'll be speaking later today. We were able to meet with government officials in Naypyidaw, as well as Yangon, and other religious and civic leaders, human rights advocates, and persecuted communities. And afterwards, in my own capacity, I spent 3 days in the refugee camps in Cox's Bazars, meeting with Rohingya who had fled Burma. Overall, I think I collected about 36 stories of survivors. I met with groups of imams, young men, women, children, families. I even heard new information of how conditions for religious freedom had deteriorated for years before, that this wasn't a surprise attack, that this had many years had led up to the atrocities that occurred on October 27th. And I also learned a lot about the fears that people had about returning and what they needed in order to feel safe. So here officially my capacity as a USERF commissioner, and I did want to share some findings and some recommendations that we have. First, I wanted to share that we at USURF are disappointed with the lack of progress on religious freedom for Rohingya Muslims who are still in Burma. As you know, on that date in August, the Burmese military launched a genocidal campaign in the Rakhine State under the pretext of targeting insurgents. There was broad documentation of Burmese military units involved in indiscriminate killings of civilians, mass rape, and other sexual violence, and arbitrary detentions and arrests. Both government authorities and mobs have shuttered and destroyed mosques, prevented Rohingya from worshiping or attending religious schools. They interfered with Islamic funeral rites, desecrating and burning Qurans, and targeting imams for detention, torture, and killing, and even of their families. Currently, there are an estimated 120,000 internally displaced Rohingya confined to camps in Burma, with severe limitations on their movements. During our visit, Rohingya interlocutors told us that the number of checkpoints had increased threefold in the last few years. We do want to call out and applaud the US government for their efforts to hold Burmese officials accountable. The only way the Rohingya people will feel safe returning to Burma is if officials responsible for their persecution are held accountable. Citizenship is guaranteed and conditions change for those who are currently living in the Rakhine State. In December of 2019, the US Department of Treasury enacted targeted sanctions against 4 senior Burmese military officials due to their command responsibility for the atrocities that occurred in Rakhine and in the Chin State. These designated individuals were the commander-in-chief of the Burmese military, Min Aung Hlaing, and his deputy, So Win, as well as leaders of 2 light infantry divisions in the Rakhine State, Than O and Ong Ong, leaders of the 99th and the 33rd, who their documented atrocities were especially terrible. We welcome the United Kingdom's announcement just this past July of targeted sanctions against Min Aung Hlaing and So Win. And we are also urging the European Union, Australia, Canada, and other governments to take similar actions to send a clear message that war criminals will not be welcomed in the international community. We also don't believe the US State Department's 2018 report labeling these crimes as ethnic cleansing is strong enough considering the evidence. We are urging the State Department to conclude definitely and publicly that the Burmese military's actions against the Rohingya Muslims either meet the definition of crimes against humanity and or genocide. On December 3rd, 2019, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum concluded that there were, quote, compelling evidence that the Burmese military committed ethnic cleansing, crimes against humanity, and genocide against the Rohingya. And in August 2019, UN Independent International Fact-Finding Mission report concluded that the Burmese military's actions indicated its, quote, genocidal intent. USURF believes a determination of crimes against humanity or genocide would help the ongoing prosecution against the Burmese government in the International Court of Justice, in the International Criminal Court, and with a court case in Argentina. In addition, the determination would refocus and remobilize international efforts to protect the Rohingya Muslims worldwide. We welcome these ongoing court cases against the Burmese government, and we urge the US government to support them. USURF believes that the US government can and should support these cases by collecting, preserving, and analyzing evidence of international crimes committed against the Rohingya. A public declaration of US support would help increase international pressure on the Burmese government to cooperate with these 3 major investigations. The first case is in the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ. On November 11th, 2019, Gambia instituted proceedings against Burma before the ICJ, alleging violations of the Genocide Convention. And on January 23rd, 2020, the ICJ unanimously granted provisional measures requiring that the Burmese government, quote, take all measures within its power to ensure the military and irregular armed units, quote, do not commit acts of genocide against the Rohingya. In May, the Burmese government submitted its first report on its compliance with the ICJ's ruling, but the report has not yet been made public. The next court case is the International Criminal Court case. Although Burma is not a signatory to the Rome Statute, on November 14th, 2019, the ICC authorized the prosecutor to proceed with a limited investigation into crimes under its jurisdiction against Rohingya in Burma's Rakhine State, where at least one element occurred in Bangladesh, which is party to the Rome Statute. So Burma has not accepted this jurisdiction, and it has stated that it will not allow the ICC investigators to enter the country. And lastly, Argentina has a case in their judicial system that is important. On November 13th, 2019, Rohingya activists filed a criminal complaint against the Burmese government under Argentina's universal jurisdiction law. We also recommend measures be taken to prevent Burmese parties from abusing Facebook and other US technology in order to spread disinformation and incite hatred against the Rohingya. And the violence against Rohingya Muslims, much of it was fueled by hate speech, misinformation, and incitement to violence on social media, particularly on Facebook. Buddhist nationalists and government officials have used the platform to threaten religious minorities, although Facebook did block accounts of the General Min Aung Hlaing and several other senior officials in August of 2018. There are reports that intolerant groups continue to use the platform to organize violence against religious minorities. In October of 2020, USCIRF plans to hold a hearing to examine how the US government can counteract hate speech and disinformation against Rohingya Muslims and other religious minorities around the world. So we'll be releasing that date and more information about that hearing soon. So we hope that you'll be able to join us. You know, we at USCIRF will continue to shine a light on the atrocities committed against the Rohingya and vigorously support efforts for accountability and justice. We also will continue to urge the US government and the international community to use all the tools at their disposal to pressure Burma to change the conditions on the ground for the Rohingyas there and for Christians and other religious minorities. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Nadine Maenza, and we appreciate you taking a personal responsibility to visit people inside Burma and also refugees in Bangladesh. And your voice is highly respected. Now I would like to request Daniel Sullivan. He's with Refugee International as a senior advocate for human rights and refugees. He focuses on Myanmar, Sudan, South Sudan, and other areas affected by mass displacement, and in the world where there are more refugees now than the World War II. We understand the work of Daniel Sullivan and Refugee International is extremely critical for human beings. So thank you so much for being there for those people who wonder if anybody is with us. Daniel Sullivan.
Thank you. And thanks so much for hosting this discussion. And I think the timing is really important. I mean, as you mentioned, we're heading into the 3-year mark from the mass exodus of Rohingya from Myanmar into Bangladesh on August 25th. As quick way of introduction, as was said, I work for Refugees International, which is an international advocacy organization. We're based in Washington, D.C., but travel around the world in normal times to meet with people who've been displaced, and have been doing that since Refugees International has been doing that since the late 70s. And I know in trips that I've taken in meeting with Rohingya, I've met with people who have remember meeting with some of my predecessors at Refugees International in the early 90s. Just a reminder that this is a long time issue that's been going on, and the persecution of the Rohingya, although today we've reached a new level. I've been visiting the camps in Bangladesh. I've traveled to camps in internally displaced camps in Myanmar, and have visited Rohingya in Malaysia and Thailand as well. And what we've been trying to do is show, we've focused a lot on the humanitarian situation, but what it ultimately all comes back to is the root causes and the fact that for decades there's been this persecution, and that 3 years ago it reached this level where the majority of the Rohingya who had been living in Rakhine State were forced out. And so now, as we were looking up to this point of the 3-year mark, we launched a campaign with several partners, many who are on this call, calling for what we believe is the single most important and influential step that can be taken to address the suffering of the Rohingya, and that is for the United States and Secretary Pompeo in particular to take the step to recognize and designate what happened and is happening to the Rohingya as genocide. We recognize that there's no silver bullet to solve everything, but I'll just spend the few minutes I have to explain why we believe that is so important. And basically it comes down to three reasons. Number one is accountability and the importance of calling a crime what it is. Number two is the attention that this brings to prevent further atrocities. And then third is a show of solidarity, both with the Rohingya people and with countries like Bangladesh that are hosting. So I'll just go through those quickly. First, on accountability, I think it's been laid out already. My fellow panelists have said all of the reports and facts that have been brought out, the evidence. I know when we were on the ground in the first days of the exodus, and it was very clear from people we spoke to, Refugees International said this is crimes against humanity. The determination of genocide, of course, has a little bit higher threshold where you have to prove intent. But if you look at all of the facts that have come out since then, it's very clear that it is genocide. And we have a determination that we have on our website that goes into that. The fact-finding mission goes into even more detail. And then the case before the International Court of Justice also lays out why the intent is clear there. And we believe that the US government should find the same conclusion. So it's important to recognize what so many independent groups and organizations have already shown, what the State Department itself, this very comprehensive survey shows of the evidence of how organized and widespread and where the intent was can be seen from the statements of higher level military officials. And as was mentioned on Facebook and others, there is lots of evidence of this. So that's the first thing, is just it's so important to call a crime what it is, to provide that accountability. Then the second thing is to prevent further atrocities and to bring attention. And so first on bringing attention, we're in a strange world, to say the least, at this time, and where there's a lot of tension and resources going towards fighting COVID-19. There are a lot of other humanitarian situations around the world that require attention. And so this is a time where you can, when you use the word that's as powerful as genocide for what it is, that can help to maintain attention on this issue. And it can help to prevent further atrocities. So as the fact-finding mission has said, there's an ongoing high risk of genocide and further atrocities in Myanmar as we speak. There are abuses continuing. We've seen the fighting that has happened with the Arakan army, which has further destabilized the area, continued attacks on civilians, whether Rohingya or Rakhine, Chin. We see the denial of internet blackouts, long-standing restrictions on access for humanitarian aid, generally a lack of witnesses on the ground for further atrocities happening. Just last month, the government, the Myanmar military warned of further clearance operations, the exact kind of terms they were using 3 years ago when they attacked the Rohingya, on using that now to threaten Rakhine villages. So the fact is that we're in many ways things have gotten worse. As was mentioned, the International Court of Justice came out with provisional measures tasking the government to report on what it's doing to prevent genocide. So it sees that threat as real enough that action needs to be taken. So calling it genocide would help to bring that kind of attention to help to prevent further atrocities from happening, which is a very real threat. And then the third reason we think it's so important to come out with that genocide determination, why it would be important, is that it shows solidarity, both with the people, the Rohingya people who've been forced from their homes, and also for a country like Bangladesh, where everyone, I think, is very grateful for the providing of refuge that's happened, and what the government of Bangladesh has done to help the Rohingya. But there have also been some very problematic policies pursued by the government of Bangladesh, including restricting access to phone and internet for Rohingya refugees, access to livelihoods, freedom of movement, We remain very concerned about plans to move refugees to Bhasan Char, an island in the Bay of Bengal that there has been no independent assessment of its safety or discussions of how humanitarians would access and be able to help Rohingya there. There's already some 300 Rohingya who had left in desperation on boats who have been put onto that island. So we continue to worry about that. But I think that if we want to continue to support Bangladesh, to bring in the kind of funds that are needed to help the humanitarian response, to help the host community, and to show that we recognize where the root causes of this are and that the ultimate solution is in Myanmar and changing Myanmar's policies. If we want to show that, then this genocide designation can be a very strong signal to show that the people in Bangladesh are not alone in helping the Rohingya, and that and to encourage them to take the most positive kind of policies forward. So I think it's worth also mentioning just that the Rohingya in Cox's Bazar continue to, and those who are still in Rakhine face a very tough humanitarian situation. We have the threat of COVID-19, which the official cases are fairly low. As of last week, around 65 confirmed cases, but we know that that cannot be the whole story, just given the conditions, the density of the population. And we've seen people who have been desperate going out on boats, hundreds of people stranded at sea. But a reminder that all of this goes back to the years of persecution that happened with Myanmar and the continuing risks that are in Myanmar. And so the need to address that. And so that brings me full circle to why the genocide determination is so important. And so we right now are trying to use this moment to push Secretary Pompeo to make that designation. There's a petition which has been supported by more than 80 other organizations right now that is up, that we will be delivering just ahead of August 25th. And so I encourage anyone who has not signed on to please do so. You can find that at refugiesinternational.org. Refugees International's president, Eric Schwartz, testified before Congress earlier this week, last Monday, and what we heard was an overwhelming outpouring of bipartisan support for this designation. And I think it's important to continue to show that. And we're working on getting a letter from various legal experts and faith leaders to continue this wave of a push for this genocide designation. So that's an action that everyone here can take to help to push this. Again, we realize there's no silver bullets. Taking this measure will not solve all of the problems, but we do believe it is the single most important immediate step that the US government can take to push for further action to move all the other things that need to happen to address the plight of the Rohingya forward. So I'm happy to discuss any of that more during the Q&A. Thank you again for this really important discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel Sullivan, and I especially like the action item, in there. I would like now our leader, Tun Khin. He's president of Burmese Rohingya organization, which is UK-based, but with huge contacts throughout. He has been a leading voice for Rohingya people around the world. Tun Khin was born and brought up in the Arakan state, where Rohingyas have been indigenous people living in their ancestral land. They did not come from anywhere. It has been part of Burma for very short, less than half a century. Before the independence, British gave that area to Burma. His grandfather was a parliamentary secretary, actually, during the democratic period of Burma. But today, he's not a citizen of Burma because the 1982 citizenship laws take out Rohingya as a whole from the citizenship. And so he became stateless. So Tun Khin has been extremely helpful for this cause. He has testified many times to the US Congress, spoken at the Genocide Museum, and has been a part of filing a lawsuit against the Burmese government under the universal jurisdiction in Australia. Welcome, Brother Tun Khin. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Brother Malik, Brother Imam Malik Mujahid and Burma Task Force team and Justice for All team organizing this timely event. It's a great honor to be this panel today. When I visited to Rohingya camps in Bangladesh and Cox's Bazar, it is very moving to hear that what the most want is not revenge, but justice. These are people who have lost everything, who have literally had to flee for their lives, and who have seen family members killed, raped, and oppressed for decades. Rohingya realized that the only way to break the cycle of genocide is to hold those responsible to justice. Justice for Rohingya means several things. Firstly, it means holding those responsible for the genocides against us to account after independent investigations and before independent civilian court. This is not possible in Myanmar at the moment. The Myanmar government is capable of this. Their investigations are only serving to whitewash military atrocities and will not lead to those most responsible, like Senior General Mi Aung Hlaing, being held to account. But justice is also about ending the ongoing genocide against us. It means restoring our full citizenship rights, to freedom of movement, to practice our religion freely, send out our children to school and access medical care. It means ensuring hundreds of thousands of refugees can return to their homes. International justice is not an exact science. We need to push for several fronts. What is happening at the ICJ, International Court of Justice, and at the ICC, International Criminal Court, is hugely positive. At BROC, Burmese Rohingya Organization, UK, we have tried different paths, universal jurisdiction. This is based on the idea that some crimes are so horrible that they concern humanity as a whole, can be tried anywhere, regardless of where they are committed or from where the perpetrator is. The Rohingya genocide is definitely one such crime. In November last year, we launched a universal jurisdiction case in Argentina, where judiciary has a history of trying such cases, including over Francisco Franco fascist era in Spain. We are supported by Thomas Quintana, former UN special reporter on human rights in Myanmar, and Latin American NGOs that have worked on the same issues. Our cases focus on the role of Myanmar civilian and military leadership in the genocide against Rohingya. Important to not just highlight the role of Mi Aung Hlaing and the generals, but also the Aung San Suu Kyi. The civilian government is just a complicit in the genocide. This case sent a strong message of international support, global fight against impunity. Argentina showing support in the same way as Gambia. The UJ case is pressure tool as much as a legal tool. Keep the pressure on Myanmar. This is very important. UJ is universal jurisdiction is one of many tools in the toolbox of international justice. Important to use all tools available. For Rohingya, gives hope and recognition that what has happened against them is the gravest of all crimes. It shows Myanmar that there is nowhere to hide. More and more countries taking action. The Argentinian judiciary is currently deciding whether to take up the case or not. We are confident and hopeful of positive ruling soon. In May, we received some good news when courts in Argentina ruled that our case is complementary to the ICC case, not in competition with it. If the court takes up the case, this could mean that Aung San Suu Kyi and other officials get called to testify in Argentinian courts. over their role in the genocide. This goes to the heart of what so many Rohingya want, to see our oppressors stand trial. We need international support to bring justice. We encourage other countries across the world to also take up universal jurisdiction cases. Indeed, this was one of the recommendations of the fact-finding missions UN mandated. Pressure helps, and the momentum for international justice we see now is hugely encouraging. Slowly but surely the net is closing around Myanmar leaders. This is no less than what Rohingya and Rakhine, Kachin, Shan, Ta'ang, and Karen communities who have suffered from the military for decades deserve. Thank you very much. I stop here.
Well, thank you so much, Brother Tun Khin. Thank you so much once again. And also thank you for correcting me that it was not Australia, but Argentina where your file that lawsuit I misspoke. I was wondering about that, but thank you so much. It was 2012 when Burma Task Force was established. It's a coalition of 38 US and Canadian Muslim organization. And we work in coalition with Faith Coalition to stop genocide, which evangelical Christians, Jewish and Muslim imams are part of that particular coalition. Now we will have a sort of a Q&A between the panelists, but those people who are watching us on Galaxy 19 satellite or on any of the social media or Amazon Fire TV, you can always send a question to us through any of the social media, which those who are on Zoom with us, they can put their question in Q&A and be ready, and those will be read and responded to. One of the questions which Commissioner Maenza, I have for you, big efforts are being made to declare a genocide. And, the way I came to this conclusion that it's a genocide was I just started reading about it. Mm-hmm. I say, oh, if this is the definition, if it doesn't apply to Rohingya, the definition probably is wrong. And US House passed and, Refugee International putting an effort, and whole lot of people are saying that. What is it which you being part of the government, although in a bipartisan commission, mm-hmm. What can you say? How do you communicate with the State Department to ensure that they do declare it a genocide?
Right. Well, we, as you know, we're an independent agency. So we were created at the same time as the International Religious Freedom Office of the State Department was created. So it was 22 years ago. And the nice thing about the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom is we are laser focused on religious freedom. So we don't have to take anything else into account. We just call a spade, and we look at the conditions and we call it out regardless of our relationship with the country or any other conditions. I know at the State Department, there is some concern that, from what I've been told, that using a designation like genocide, it needs to come with a response to match that. And so there certainly has been a robust discussion about that as far as we know internally in the government. But obviously they haven't yet made that designation, because when you do, you do need, genocide is such a big word. You don't say genocide and then do nothing. And so I think their conversation is happening. We have, we have been pretty bold, as I was today, in coming out and asking the US government to make this designation. It is interesting. I know my fellow panelists had mentioned that how things have changed. In 2018, I gave a speech and I said genocide in the speech, and literally people like freaked out, like said, because we're a government agency, are we saying it's genocide? Does that mean the US government is? And there was a robust conversation about what language we could even use it can serve. So it's really interesting. In 2018, everyone was afraid to kind of use, not everyone, but a lot of people were concerned with using that word. And I don't think, I don't hear any sensitivity when I say, our conversation today is kind of the way that we now look at these crimes. I know when I was in Cox's Bazar talking to survivors, what really struck me is how conditions had changed for years before the attacks, and how they weren't allowed to keep their doors locked. If they locked their doors, they would get arrested. Like, you know, fences were removed. There were all sorts of signs that they were leading to this, and you can't look away from that. And so for us at USERF, we're going to continue to speak out, urging the government to make a designation that fits the crimes, because we believe that, for all the reasons we've all mentioned, that it's necessary.
Daniel, do you think it has something to do what is in the media? Because in case of Yazidis, you know, it moved pretty fast and it was declared a genocide. But for Rohingyas who have been asking and struggling and face such a horrible tragedy, you have been trying for a while. Do you think it is something to do with why the world is not seeing it on their screens?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to know why exactly they haven't reached that determination, other than, you know, there's that higher threshold of proving intent. But as we've said and others, that you look at the evidence that's there, and you talk to international legal scholars, there is sufficient precedent in international cases to make that argument. So there's that sort of legal reticence, and then there's as was mentioned, the reticence to actually, well, that means we have to do something. And there's a whole history of debates over genocide going, you know, particularly in Rwanda, where the infamous kind of press conferences at the State Department of, well, how many acts of genocide does it take to lead up to genocide? So there's a lot behind that. The case of the Yazidi is interesting because that was a case where actually Congress helped to put pressure on and put a timeline on for when Secretary Kerry should make a designation. And for anyone interested in finding out a little more about that, I point you to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum put out a great report last year all about the process and past examples of what was involved in reaching a genocide determination, and that can be very instructive, I think, to what we're trying to do now with the Rohingya.
Daniel, do you think, tell me, I mean, you emphasize that declaration of genocide is going to be helpful for Rohingya cause. Share with us how declaration of genocide in the Yazidi case was helpful for Yazidis' cause.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I haven't focused in on the Yazidi case. I can just say that in general, it clearly helped to bring international attention and pressure that helped to bring in extra funding, humanitarian wise, and diplomatic and different kinds of pressure, including, you know, military pressure in that case, where, you know, when people were surrounded and in immediate risk of being killed or starved to death. So clearly, you know, the eventually bringing a genocide determination did bring attention and funds and diplomatic pressure, which has helped to better address what happened to the Yazidi. And again, hope that a similar kind of thing can happen with the Rohingya.
If I can go ahead and speak into that, I've done a lot of work in the Yazidi community, and unfortunately, you know, the conditions in Sinjar are no different now than they were 6 years ago. So, you know, the international community did not step up the way they should have. There are 83 countries that were a part of the coalition to defeat Daesh, and yet Yazidis are coming back to houses that are still rigged with bombs, and there's been very little development in Sinjar, but they are returning at pretty big numbers. I think we had about 8,000 return in the last month, where there was only 1,500 that returned a month before. And a lot of the reason is because of COVID and because of lack of an ability to travel with all the roadblocks. They can go back and forth between Sinjar and their homes. So I want to say that the system may be broken at this point too, and this is a good opportunity for us to travel with all the roadblocks. They can go back and forth between Sinjar and their homes. So I want to say that the system may be broken, also, and this is a good opportunity for us
to travel with all those roadblocks and can go back and forth between Cinder and their homes. So
I also want to mention, the other thing that's important to note with the Yazidi situation is that was a genocide against perpetrators were non-state actors. So ISIS was perpetrators. It's really unique that we're looking at a country, the government and military being perpetrators of genocide. So I think that makes it a little bit of a different discussion.
Okay. Tun Khin, you mentioned, you started your conversation by mentioning issue of justice. I remember, I mean, must have interviewed one-on-one on video for maybe more than 100, 150 Rohingya refugees, imams and clergy and the layperson and even children. Number one thing they say is justice. Do you think declaration of genocide will bring them this recognition that the world finally think right? Is it some type of mechanism to achieve justice?
First thing is, as a genocide survivor, myself also, as even I left from Burma, like how persecution, I couldn't go to the university, I was not able to go university. I faced those restrictions and like others, how persecution, I couldn't go how systematically persecution, institutionalized persecution I have faced in Burma. So one thing here is those survivors where I met Bangladesh, they have lost their fathers and their sisters been raped. The victims, they really want what they want to, what they face, what persecution they face is need to be named. This is not crime against them. This is a intentionally destroying a community, which is a genocide. This calling that name is demand of the victims, and that can protect many Rohingyas like me, many genocide survivors in Saudi Arabia, in Malaysia. They fled by boat, taking their life at risk by passing through high ocean, like about 15 days, 20 days, or to 1 month, 2 months. The way many Rohingyas become unbearable situation in our current state, that's how they left the country. So that can give, by declaration of genocide, that can give protection to these Rohingya genocide survivors, many parts of the world. That is first thing. Secondly, by declaring that, it will step up more international action. Like US is a leading, if US leading role can speak a lot in international arena, including justice and accountability and including others political pressure. So that can help a lot. That's what I can say.
I mean, when you mention this, it becomes difficult for me because among the people I have met and sat down are somebody who authorized me to always mention her name and her story is Anwara. And she was just 13 when her parents were murdered and siblings. And she was dragged into a hut by Burmese military soldiers and raped all night long. She will faint and wake up in the morning, found herself alone, and she escaped without clothes. And somebody spotted her in a hut, in a vegetable garden, and gave her some clothes and brought her walking several days, a rape victim, a teenager. When I ask her that people are thinking of sending Rohingya back to Burma, what's your response? What would you do? He said, nobody's sending me anywhere. I will just throw myself under a truck. And the last December 2019, when I met her, she had already attempted a suicide. These are little girls. I think of her, and because of her insistence, I mention her name. And there are many. Most of them don't share what happened with them. There are many, many of these. Is there a way, Daniel, in which Refugee International helps the victim of sexual violence in a dignified manner, that they are helped and they are supported properly?
Yeah, thanks for that powerful story. And I can attest to having heard many similar kinds of stories in talking to refugees on the ground. The role of Refugees International is we don't have programs on the ground, and we also don't take government money, which allows us to be independent in our advocacy. And so what we try to do is make sure that there is government funding, and that there is the right kind of response by humanitarian actors to address the kinds of challenges where, as you point out, for the Rohingya population, just an unbelievable number. And I forget the exact statistics that the State Department survey itself showed, but just a shocking number of people who witnessed sexual violence. So it's absolutely a key part of this, and it's something that continues to affect the people on the ground. And we've met with several organizations who specifically do work to try to help with the trauma that women and others have gone through, what children have seen just in what they've seen, and trying to make sure that those kinds of programs are going forward. And right now, I would say the other important thing that's coming up, one of my colleagues focuses in on women and girls who have been displaced around the world. And COVID-19 brings a new challenge of where we're seeing, as you mentioned, it's so difficult to know the exact numbers because not everyone feels safe coming forward. But from what we hear from humanitarian workers around the world is there's a huge increase in gender-based violence in places like camps where people are staying home more, there's more strain. So that's something that needs to be a big part of the global humanitarian response, both addressing the trauma that's happened because of sexual violence in places like what happened to the Rohingya, and going forward, the dangers that COVID-19 is creating for people in those camps.
Sullivan, Commissioner Maenza, I mean, the US has given more money for Rohingya refugees than probably any other country, more than $620 million. What do you think future holds for this? Because people are still there, they still need support. Are you afraid that it may dwindle down when it comes to future? Because Bangladesh is a poor country, as we all know. They may or may not be able to support all of these people. And at the same time, they're not allowed to earn their living. They do not have refugee status. They cannot even go have education beyond the 3rd grade. So two-part of question, and I want each one of you to dwell on that. What is the future of Rohingya people? Of course, nobody's going to bomb Burma to have them accept Rohingya refugees back. They are the one who bomb Rohingyas to leave the country. What is their future? A solution with the United Nations Human Rights Charter is these are refugees, give them a refugee status. Why the call to give them refugee status in each country is not as loud as the call to declare it a genocide? I mean, until they are able to go back, they need to have proper status, should be able to live their livelihood, should be able to educate. I mean, Burma denies education, Bangladesh is denying education, Malaysia is denying education. who in the world has a heart to allow these people to educate themselves? What is it which we all can do on this panel? Anyone?
Sure, I'll start with this one. I wish I had the answers for what the future holds. I know we need to continue the conversation. The people I spoke, you're right, education was something everyone wanted. This is a hardworking group of people. So many I spoke to told me that, they had animals and farms in Rakhine, and they never had to worry about money. They had good lives and strong families and a strong family community, focused community. And here they are now in a refugee camp with people just all around them and no freedom of movement, no future. Their children, all the teenagers I spoke to, all the young men and women I spoke to wanted an education. And so, I think the number one, we keep talking about it. And I think the US is going to continue to support Bangladesh. I know because they've cut back their refugee numbers that they've been more willing to fund refugees abroad. So I do feel confident the US will continue to fund that. And I do, as I mentioned earlier, that this is unique compared to what happened against the Christians and Yazidis and Shias in Iraq, and that those were non-state actors. We're talking about, Burma being a nation state committing genocide against their own people. So I think that, the international community needs to be a little bit tougher on Burma and on the conditions for the Rohingyas that are in Burma in the Rakhine state. Those 120,000 that are currently don't have the kind of rights that other people in Burma have, and that's unacceptable. And so I think more pressure needs to be put on Burma, more sanctions. A lot of, when I gave my earlier remarks, the UK and the United States has put targeted sanctions, for instance, on some of the leaders. But the EU and a lot of other countries haven't. So, if we tied up all their money, at least there would be a consequence for this kind of behavior that maybe, would make others be less likely to engage in it, even current, military leaders, if they saw, if they engaged in this kind of activity, that perhaps they would be subject to the same sort of sanctions. So I think we need to be far more aggressive in how we're approaching this. And my heart just breaks for the story you told, Imam Milek, about that young girl, and so many people I met. This one mother that with the young children put down a picture of her husband that had been laminated of him after he'd been killed, that was horrendous. And she just I want people to know what we endured, and because she needed us to know. And my heart broke for her, because I felt for her and I felt I could honor her by hearing her story, but the fact that I wasn't able to give her an answer for what her future could be. And so I do hope that we can help figure that out as we continue this conversation.
Daniel, Refugee International handles a lot of refugee situation. Why, don't you think the demand to declare them official refugees should be as loud for their livelihood as our call for it to be declared a genocide?
Yeah, you bring up an important point. It's something that we have for years put in our own reports and our calls, is that the Rohingya should be recognized as refugees and should be given the kinds of services and rights that go along with that. I'll say, even as we continue to focus on genocide and trying to prevent further atrocities, we can't forget the conditions that many Rohingya in other parts of the world are, what the conditions they're facing. One of my first trips with Refugees International was to Malaysia and Thailand, and talking to Rohingya there, and the challenges that they faced in terms of education and in terms of just a lot of issues with detention. We're seeing that rise up again, and particularly in Malaysia, a lot of demonizing of Rohingya refugees, particularly around with COVID, as we've seen in other parts of the world, but a demonization of the Rohingya refugees, stigmatization that has to be addressed. And I mentioned earlier, we can't, even as we keep the pressure and recognize where the root causes are, we can't turn a blind eye to negative policies that the government of Bangladesh is pursuing. And I will say there was one blip of hope just ahead of COVID hitting where there was a pilot program allowed by Bangladesh to start education at some of the younger grades. So there are efforts on the ground that are going on, and those cannot be, we can't lose sight of those even as we're pushing on the genocide determination.
Tun Khin, does this constitute a priority, an important issue for Rohingyas to be declared a refugee?
Sorry, I didn't get you. What?
Is it is it part of a Rohingya demand to provide them a official refugee status in the countries they have reached?
What happened in current situation, we can see that the way how Burmese government, against the Rohingya, the ongoing genocide, as we can see, they are not, there is no willingness to take these people back. One thing is international pressure is not enough. That's why they know that. So currently there are 600,000 of Rohingya in Burma. Burmese government and military, they are jointly trying to get rid of them. So the way Rohingya, all Rohingya, we want to go back our native land. We want to live peacefully. We want to see restoring our rights and given protection. That is our demand. But what current situation happening, the way how we can see is in the meantime, it is very important that Rohingya should be who are in Malaysia, in Indonesia, India, other countries, international other governments should protect them and should give them a kind of resettlement that can give a kind of including especially Bangladesh government. I want to say building the survivors. Burmese government and military systematically destroying us. The narrative we have to hear, we have to counteract to build the community, to rebuild the community, empowering youth in camps and other countries. It is very important. We should educate them, we should give them resettlement, and we should allow refugee status and providing education for them. That is one of the top priority. And others, a growing population without education in Bangladesh, this is a big concern. So what I want to say here is international community like US, UK, they are largest, they are big donors for the humanitarian aid. We really appreciate it. In Bangladesh government and Bangladeshi people, we will never forget what they give us, a shelter and a protection. But as we can see, the situation is not improving in Burma. The genocide is still ongoing. We really need international like US, UK, OIC countries, Bangladesh and Malaysia governments help to empower, to rebuild, and to do much more pressure. Without, one thing I want to point out here is we have to look at governments like doing sanctions, individual, me online and others. It's not enough. Need to do much more. It is important that the government should follow UN fact-finding missions recommendations. UN fact-finding missions recommendations are very important recommendations. They mentioned that without international intervention, there is no such way to solve Rohingya issue. This is very important. Let me tell, like as you mentioned earlier, during my democratic period time, my grandfather was a member of parliament. I was not recognized as a citizen. My father did government service more than 20 years. So since my family fled in 1978, before I was born, this cycle of genocidal acts, cycles, and these persecutions are continuing. How many more years we need to suffer? How many more Rohingya need to be killed, raped, and murdered in front of our eyes. This is going on in 21st century, what we are witnessing. Whenever genocide happen, international community say never again, but this is right now is happening. So we really need international intervention, particularly determine the genocide declaration and bringing them justice, pushing much more, pressure, especially, military and military-related company sanctions are needed in this institution in Burma. Military related companies need to be sanctioned. That, and also one thing I want to point out here again, Aung San Suu Kyi, we Rohingya have supported her many years. I campaigned for her release in US Congress and US State Department and many parliaments. I spoke about to release her and political prisoners. Many years we did that. Today, she is complicit in this genocide. The narrative governments need to be changed. She is actually, people say she cannot do anything. She is having problem with it. But what I can see here is she herself is a problem to solve this. She is giving, her government ministers are pushing Rohingya to take NVC right now. Right now, these last few days, even we are hearing national verification card, which is permanently, her government is making us a stateless permanently. If you take NVC, national verification card, your son or your daughter cannot be citizen at all in Burma. You have no political rights, no other rights at all. So as we were full citizenship of Burma, we will never take it. This is what we call it a genocide card. Our government is trying to do. So in the governments like US, UK, other countries have to really look at, change that Aung San Suu Kyi's government is doing nothing, just instead they are government, NLD government is completed in this genocide. Without pushing NLD government, there is no such way to solve this issue. Even now we are waiting. Election is coming soon. We do not know even Rohingya candidates they will allow or not under NLD government. So looks like government will not include the Rohingya right to vote and right to be member of parliament, even 2020 election. The first time in history we have witnessed in 2015. Now we can see under NLD government, supported by US, UK, and many other countries, and funding government, this election commission. Under of that, this is going to happen. So we have to be very strong. It is very important that if that can happen under NLD government, under many governments, this can happen. This will bring a big legacy.
Thank you so much, Tun Khin. One of the things which I would like to know from both Daniel and Commissioner Maenza is that to influence other government, for example, the Refugee International, does it try to influence just the US government or the other countries where refugees are, like Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, and other countries to help Rohingyas acquire some status? Do you do that advocacy over there? And Commissioner, question with you is just yourself. I know that yourself have been denied entering in India for, I don't know, 10, 15 years, but do other countries, are you able to take a delegation and request them to provide a better facilities of education and earning their own livelihood? You mentioned somebody who had farms. Actually, Rohingya people are very self-reliant people. When they were coming in 3 years ago, I saw if somebody has nothing with them, little bit of rice, and other side they will have just this small cellular cellular panel. And I started investigating, and it turned out that since Burmese government in its discrimination will not allow electricity will be in the village, but they will give it to only Burmese, they consider to be Burmese, but not to Rohingya Burmese. So they started to, importing solar panels and they were carrying those because they were their livelihood. They will charge one light bulb, they will charge their cell phone with that. So very self-reliant people, I fully agree with you. Actually, one of the person talking to me told me that he has several hundred. He was living in the area where there was not a prior level of extraordinary genocide. So he has a lot of animals. And he said some of those animals military took, and he found in Bangladesh market those animals because he has his marking being sold right there. So they were self-reliant people. But how do you persuade other government other than the US? So Daniel, you have some response to that, because Rohingya refugees and Rohingya genocide survivors have a list of requests and demands from the governments. How your advocacy can incorporate those things?
Thank you. Yes, in short, yes, we do advocate to any country that's involved with the response in any kind of displacement case. So in the case of the Rohingya, if we go on a trip, we are meeting with government officials. So in the case of Bangladesh, I've regularly met with the RRC on the ground, the head of the response in Cox's Bazar, with the foreign secretary, with others. So yes, we do try to push and raise those issues of some of the ones that I've mentioned on Bashar Char, access to education, the internet and phone restrictions. So yes, we do. We are based in Washington, D.C., and so our primary target or for advocacy is the U.S. government. That's where we have the most kind of ability to push things. So and also with the UN. So that's where we a lot of times will go through U.S. government officials or ambassadors to countries to try to help to raise those kinds of issues of where somebody's not, if a group isn't being recognized as refugees, if they're not getting access to education or livelihoods, and then also working with local groups and partnering with local groups and advocacy groups to try to help to amplify their messages. Not to mention the refugees, displaced persons themselves. We're always trying to, in our reports, bring out their stories, or on social media, bringing out videos and getting the messages directly from them. So yes, we do. We try to target whoever we can who has a role to play in improving the situation in that particular case of forcibly displaced persons.
Commissioner Maenza?
Yes, we, as you know, we only, the U.S. Commission only reports on 29 countries. So the countries we recommend is countries of particular concern or countries to be on the special watch list of the State Department. But we do engage with other countries, and we have engaged with Bangladesh, for instance, quite a bit about the Rohingyas. I personally delivered a private letter there. We had a Zoom call this spring with quite a few members of the embassy. They've been really welcoming to us to engage with us. A lot of what the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom does is private. So people see all of our public advocacy, but I want to say our most important advocacy has been behind the scenes, interacting with people, doing private letters, asking for specific things. And, we've been very concerned about the internet, for instance, there, because we know with COVID, it's a safety issue for them to not have access to information. When we visited in Burma last year, the Burmese government welcomed us, which we appreciated, set up government meetings with us. We were allowed to go to the capital, which was really interesting. But we were not able to go to Kachin and some of the other areas that we had hoped to go. And I know part of that was even the US government not wanting us to do that. And I think in Bangladesh, it was the same, because then they have to support us, provide security, things like that. So sometimes our own government it makes it a little bit harder for us to visit, and a lot of it's logistical. It's just a bad time. Like I know it was around Ramadan when we were there last year, and so they weren't able to host us in Bangladesh. So both separately, myself as well as Commissioner Bhargava, who will be speaking here later, we both didn't even talk to each other. We both had planned separate trips to Bangladesh on our own because the government wouldn't host us. And so, but as a commission and in our private capacities, we're able to do travel, communication, so certainly welcome, those of you on the panel as well as those watching this to have recommendations for things that we could weigh in and help. We're certainly glad to do so. I also wanted to mention another argument people have made to me is their fear that too much pressure on Burma would push them further towards China, which I've been surprised to hear from time to time, that I think isn't a worthwhile argument. I think they already are very close to China. Their treatment of the Rohingya isn't going to get worse because we sanction them and they move closer to China. I mean, I went to the border from Bangladesh and saw where they're building the One Belt, One Road on the border of the Rakhine in Bangladesh. So their relationship already is very close. And we know that China's been a negative influence, of course, on Burma. So, the international community that doesn't really have a good excuse for not pressuring on the government to do better.
Debbie has written on chat line, there were 617 attacks and targeting civilians inside Burma or failing to protect civilians during January to June 2020. This is 272% increase at the same time in 2012. And it correlates to increase in military budget of Burma for 180%. Is it correct that US government continues to provide military aid to Burma? Considering that, they're not fighting any wars, are they? They're not in fight with Bangladesh or China or Thailand, but they have 180% increase in military budget. So us helping militarily to Burma, how is it going to help us justify? Anyone? Well, I guess
I can just say that there are restrictions on giving military support to Burma, and that's constantly something within Congress that we're always trying to help push to make sure that those restrictions remain. There's some more broader funding on humanitarian that may involve some defense related, so you always have to be careful in balancing humanitarian aid with that. But I think it's more other countries who are providing funds and defense funds that and that just gets back to the need to build a global coalition and for the US to lead in already taking steps like targeted sanctions on individuals. Tun Khin mentioned the fact-finding mission, pushing for expanding those to military-owned enterprises as well. But all that's going to be that much more stronger if the U.S. can get other countries to come along.
As we're coming to close, I'd like to have a couple of questions. The last question, which I'm not asking us now, but I'm asking each one of us to think about hope for these people. But a question before that with Tun Khin is related to European scene. I mean, you're the only one in Europe. We're sitting here in the US. Are they moving, is there any country or a list of countries who are moving towards the direction of higher recognition of it being a genocide and taking some steps in this regard?
Unfortunately, we don't see that that far the way they are looking at, and they are much more. Our conversation during with EU's officials and others, what we forgot, they much more focus on actions and instead of language. And Unfortunately, I don't. I think same time they should do that, and we push for it. And one thing is very on a justice issue, very disappointing that some governments in Europe here, even UK, they are relying on ICOE, independent commissions of inquiry. When we raise about justice issue, that they rely on Aung San Suu Kyi's commissions. I mean, this we don't call it this independent commissions of inquiry. It's not it's government commission, and that commission is a release a report, a kind of briefing before 2 days before ICJ, I think 21st of January, around before ICJ decision, and they just want to divert the genocide case, and they are taking some steps for military who committed crimes, and military tribunal will set up, and so a lot of misguidance from the government, those are going on here. I think important thing is we cannot rely on government's commission, and we cannot rely on what Burmese government, of course European governments they engage in, but is much more need to be done. It's not really helpful. Sometimes we heard about that governments ICOE and others, those whitewash commission are, they believe that is also, we need to wait and see. I don't think this is a good point, and that encouraging that still military and government voice are hearing from international side, that is totally that is really making the case weak. So I think much more need to be done in Europe.
Let me ask you, Tun Khin, a difficult question. Question came to me by saying that almost everybody, there are different major ethnic groups, Karen fighting with arms, Kachin fighting with arms, Rakhine fighting with arms, and they are still able to survive within their country, either in jungles or protected areas, or have a sort of a ceasefire with the military. Military doesn't enter their areas and they don't enter that area. Of course, it has created a whole lot of internally displaced people, but they are still able to remain in the country. Rohingyas were the only group who surrendered their armed struggle, I think in 50s or 60s, and they're the one who are made football. Do you think those people who are using their UN rights to defend themselves within Burma were more successful and less oppressed than the Rohingya people because Rohingya chose peaceful means for their rights?
Yeah, it's a very important question, and also very critical question, I should say. I think Rohingyas, they give up, they surrendered in 1960s, around that time even. That is the first group of I think in Burma, armed groups surrendered to Burmese military, and that time they recognized as a Rohingya recognition, they give in and they restore back our identity and others. And so I think one thing is, if UN do not protect, there will be, that looks like Rohingya, some Rohingyas become very desperate. That's the way they made it something in 2017. And international community have really important that there are about 1 million Rohingya in camps. So it is important to empower these young generations. Otherwise, there will be many different desperations, or things can go different way. So that is very important. I just want to point out about it.
Well, so we're coming to the close of our panel. What is it which we can share with Rohingyas, which is about hope and future in which there is justice, future where there is hope for their children, that they grow up to become advocate for their cause and struggle for freedom peacefully, which they have chosen for a long period of time, despite all the genocide and all the pressure on people. Share with us something which we could do, and share with us something which you could do. And maybe a short prayer for Rohingyas as well.
Well, I'd be glad to start. I just want to say I've had the opportunity to stay in touch with some of the Rohingyas that I'd met either in Washington or when I was there on the ground. And I just want to let them know that, we're going to continue to fight for them, that there's a lot of people that care deeply about their plight. And I also think it's to me, it's like a two-pronged approach. It's like fighting for a future, but also fighting for you now to lighten your load, whether it be the internet or to make sure the food is available, making sure that we're advocating so your children can have an education. So I think it's wanting to look for the future, but it's also wanting to be able to let you know that we care about those things that you're going through right now, and that we're going to continue to advocate for you, and do our best to be a voice for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in so that I can give Tun Khin the last word. I would just echo that the message that there are a lot of people around the world who care about the Rohingya and who have done a lot of work and will continue to do work. I know I can say for myself and for Refugees International, this will continue to be a priority issue for us. And one place where I take hope is just in seeing the development of civil society within the camps in Bangladesh, and more Rohingya being empowered. There's a lot more that needs to be done. My last report and visit focused very much on the need to better empower Rohingya refugees. But I think that you're already seeing organically among the Rohingya population, there is more and more where they are organizing their own civil society and using their own voices. And so I get encouragement by that. And I and Refugees International and others will continue to support that. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel Sullivan and Tun Khin.
Yeah, as a Rohingya, as I mentioned earlier, as a genocide survivor myself, I always remember as advocating for many years. And I spent 4 weeks, about a month, when my brothers and sisters are fleeing, crossing the border. And it is, as an activist, I feel such a shame. Until today, we are still calling for just what we face, determination, genocide determination. We face that many decades. I mean, international community really have to think why the victims been suffering many years, even still governments have very hard to determine, to decide what they have to call for. It is myself advocating for many years. I feel ashamed, honestly. This is one thing, but there is some thing improving on justice. It is long way to go. We really have to move forward. But one thing I want to let international community know that we are a people. We have our land. We have our culture. We are manageable minority in a country. In Burma, our grandfathers' fathers contributed from the country. We just being a Rohingya, being a different religion, different culture, different ethnic group, because of our skincare, we are facing today genocide in our country. So it's not only for Rohingya. Next turn, there could be Kachin, Karen, that if not declared at, that will be much more worse situation as a whole country. One thing I want to message here is to the international community, whenever you talk about Rohingya, please, Rohingya should be included. Rohingya can speak themselves, and Rohingya voices should be on the table. We have seen that MOU signed with UNHCR and UNDP and Burmese government. There is no such word of citizenship, and no Rohingya were on the table. So Burmese government is trying to destroy our many decades, but we never give up. We will continue our fight. We will try to do our best, more filing of universal jurisdiction case and others. But we need your solidarity. We need your support. This is more than ever. We need your support is to empower our young generation. This is what I want to appeal. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Tun Khin, and thank you, Daniel Sullivan, and thank you, Commissioner Nadine Maenza. It is at the note of hope I like to conclude. 5 years ago, nobody knew what Rohingya is. Today, in all capitals of the world, people know who Rohingyas are. Rohingyas are fighting for their life. Rohingyas are indigenous people of Burma living in their ancestral land. They did not come from anywhere and they want to go back. It is our duty to help them achieve justice, peace, as we expect for ourselves. I pray for them, and I think each one of you and Burma Task Force will continue to stand with each and every one, organizations or individuals who are willing to support this cause. So go on burmataskforce.org or stopgenocide.org and sign up for support. Peace. Salam.